COVID is a good example of like one kind of more difficult for students to transition back. They've never written a test in the classroom before. And so you get all these different levels of anxiety and these different sort of engagement issues that students are dealing with just because of the kind of COVID cohorts. Changing political climate on university campuses, that's been another thing. And because not all of your students are going to come in and share your worldview, not all of them are going to agree with you. I want them to challenge me. I want them to raise questions. I want them to say, I heard about this, but you're saying this. And I want that debate to happen. And I had 4 young men come up to me after class and they say, we don't agree with this, like one of the concepts of white privilege. We don't agree with that. As and these are young men who are listening to, Jordan Peterson.
Right.
I said, do you know when that happens? And they sort of went wide-eyed a little bit. And I said, it's your job, now that you're at UT or at any university, to educate yourself.
Welcome to another episode of the DC Talks podcast. I'm your host, David Schnelly, hence the name DC Talks. This is episode 90. Can you believe it, Nate?
I cannot believe it.
It's been a while, yeah. 90 episodes deep, and I got a really special guest with me today, Mr. Nathan Innocente.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction.
I'd like to say your name the proper way.
Proper Italian way. Very
Proper
good.
Italian way. So Nate, I can call you Nate, right?
Absolutely.
I always call you Nate, but I didn't know how proper you wanted to be on air. So Nathan and I go years and years back.
Yeah.
We worked together about 5 years ago, but our kids went to elementary school in Norseman, which they're both not there. Oh, actually, well, one of your kids.
One of mine,
yeah. But yeah, we go way back there. And so if you can't see Nathan on camera, he's a pretty tall dude, he's a pretty imposing character, like, what, 6'7"?
6'8".
6'8". Sorry, I always say 6'8". Yeah. So every time I have you, like, I look tiny compared to you. Everyone's always mentioned that. They're like, you're not a small dude. Besides Nathan, you're tiny. But yeah, so Nathan reached out to me years ago, about 5-6 years ago, and about real estate. We started talking, and you had narrowed me down from other agents, and we didn't really know each other that well. And when buying houses, we realized we had a lot in common.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So basically, for our love of Scotch, our love of martial arts,
yeah,
and a love of pissing people off.
Exactly. And analysis as well. Don't forget.
Yeah. Of course, analysis. So yeah. So Nathan and I was started on this journey. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting talk, because now, what is your job? What do you do now?
I'm currently a professor of criminology at the University of Toronto.
Yeah, which is funny, because it's like you see somebody like yourself, you think you got to be in fighting or something, right?
Usually, yeah. People either think I'm military, police, firefighter, something like that.
Yeah.
They never, nobody ever guessed academic.
Yeah. I remember you told me the first time, I'm like, are you sure? Not because of anything, because you're very smart, right? It has nothing to do with that. You're just like, wow.
I just don't look the part.
Yeah, exactly. But you also have a love of martial arts. That's what I talked to. Yeah.
I've been doing that for over 30 years now. I run a martial arts school in Mississauga, with all my free time. And I've been doing a variety of martial arts. So I love training. I love practicing. And
yeah. What kind of martial arts have you been involved in?
Well, the main one I started in a long time ago was Aikido. It's the one I'm still doing now. I started a very long time ago. The Oshinkan style of Aikido, which is the more, I guess, a harder style, more, I don't want to say more militaristic, but sort of more militaristic, kind of more up my alley. But I've also trained in boxing. I've done kickboxing. I've trained in submission wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And then I tried a whole bunch of other things just for fun, like capoeira, Kyokushin karate. Like I've just, whatever I can get my hands on, whatever I can learn. I did a little bit of knife fighting. From other people, I've learned like military combatives, which are not that great. But yeah, just anything I could learn, anything I get my hands on.
Do you find a lot of it translates to other martial arts from everything you've learned?
Oh yeah. I mean, the human body only moves in so many ways, right? So I mean, if you understand the mechanics of throwing, then you probably understand the mechanics of punching. It's not terribly different, right? So a lot of crossover, a lot of carryover. It's great.
Well, obviously judo and jiu-jitsu have a lot because of their history with throws and
Absolutely.
starting from and then hitting to the ground. It's a different story.
Absolutely.
But Aikido's in there as well.
Yep.
Yeah, lots of throwing. We talked before, because I was almost a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. It's been a while since I got into it, so we started getting into it, and we talked about fighting. So on the way to driving to properties, we're talking about fighting. What do you do in this situation? So we had a really good time.
Yeah.
I can't wait to buy another property just so we can talk more shit. On a side note, Nathan came over the other day. He came at 8 o'clock. I think he left at 4 a.m.
I think so. Yeah.
We went through a couple bottles of scotch, a few cigars.
Good night.
We got to do that again soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe do it in the afternoon.
Let's be a little more responsible with it. Yeah.
Which another thing is, believe it or not, so before we get into your academics, what the real talk is about, what fascinated me was sitting there talking, and how you got to love Scotch, right? I had no idea. And then you explained to me, but maybe explain to the audience why you chose Scotch.
Right.
And because the reason why I'm asking this, because it'll talk a lot about Nathan's brain.
Right. Okay. So in the academic job market, part of the job interviews that you might go through require like a social component. So sometimes that's kind of meeting people at conferences. Sometimes if you go to a job talk, you're going out for dinner, that might lead into the evening. And at the time I didn't really drink a lot. And so I was like, okay, what I need to do is I need to figure out a drink that I can confidently order, that if anyone were to quiz me, I would know something about it. So not only do I have to like be able to consume it and not, and be able to stomach it, but I'd also have to be able to like be intelligent about it. And also one that's not going to draw too much attention, right? So I tried to think of different things, and Scotch came to mind right away. It's like, okay, if I order Scotch, that'll be good. And if anyone is an aficionado of Scotch and they ask me questions about it, I'll be able to say, okay, great. Yeah, I can talk about this. I can explain things about the distillery. I can inform myself. So really it was more just like a cover for how to get through the social elements of these potential job interviews that I haven't even gone on yet and I'm just thinking ahead to the future.
Yeah.
And so
again, this also relates to, because the first time you said you're introverted, but you're very extroverted with me. But you said, like, and I kind of now it plays into it a little.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't come across as introverted usually, but if you leave me on my own, I'm a mute for the most part. So I ended up trying Scotch. At the first time I tried it, I absolutely disliked it. Like I really had to try to acclimatize myself, but eventually I was able to acclimatize myself. And it wasn't until years later when I thought, like, why did I pick Scotch? I could have picked anything. I could have picked craft beer, could have picked wine, could have picked cognac, could have picked Armagnac. All of those would have solved the problem. Mm-hmm. And so then I was like, well, I'm not satisfied with not knowing the answer. So then I decided, okay, I'm going to go look at the time when I was making these decisions. And then I'm going to look at global sales and global marketing initiatives for all the different kinds of spirits or wines or craft beers that I could have encountered. So for a lot of spirits, the global market was tanking. Scotch was absolutely astronomical rise at the time. And that coincides, of course, with more marketing. You're hearing about it more, you're reading about it more. And so the idea that the decision was solely my own is a bit of a myth, because you're conditioned by all these other structural things. And I wanted to figure out to what extent that decision of mine was conditioned structurally. And so that's how I was able to sort of figure it out.
We're talking about this like 3:00 in the morning. I'm like, are you kidding me? You just didn't get into Scotch like I did because you like the taste of it? No. And it was like when he was talking about this, my mind was blown. Yeah. And it made me laugh that you didn't know yourself why you chose Scotch. Yeah. And then you started doing the research on your own life.
Yes. Yeah. Know thyself, right?
Yeah. Oh man. And that's so, and did obviously it helped in social settings.
It didn't. It turned out I never even had to use it, because most of in the situations that I ended up finding myself in, it wasn't like I was on the job market for a very long time. I applied to one job and I ended up getting it. So that was the end of it. And even then, the social situation there is like everything's an interview. They take you out for lunch. It's casual. That's an interview. They take you out for dinner. It's a whole day. So the interview starts when you get there in the morning and it ends when you leave at night. So it's, a 11, 12, 13 hour long interview. Dinner is an interview. So nobody goes there and is like, oh yeah, I'll have, the wine tasting menu with my, like, you just get one drink and you keep your wits about you and you nurse it. So I never really found myself needing it in any situation. It was just that at the time that I was thinking about it, it was like, it's one less thing I want to have to worry about. I want to just be able to effortlessly flow into these social settings and not have to be burdened by like, okay, well, is there some sort of expectation for what I'm going to order or how I'm going to act in a certain situation? You just cover your bases and then you can effortlessly flow through these situations. Only an introvert could come up with this scheme, by the way. It's not like
I learned by drinking lots of wine and Scotch. So
I
like this. What's it like? So you and I started talking about you like Scotch and you always had the history. And I'm like, I like PD, I like this. And that's what Lagavulin came up and we really liked it. And I stumbled, I told my story. I stumbled into Lagavulin at a Costco on my on my honeymoon. Yeah. And it turned into one of my favorite Scotches. That's how I fell in love with the peatiness of Scotch. And I didn't
like how regular people do.
Yeah. And we was drinking wine when we were kids. Well, you're partial Italian, right? Yeah. So I'm like, I don't know if you guys grew up in your household drinking wine, but it was always on our table. My grandfather always had, we had a lot of homemade wine. So that's kind of like, and then I remember first time I got drunk, we have families in the States, the Ritzel family, and the Capano family, the Ritzel family. The Ritzels own a street in Delaware. right? At the end of so they only, and it was called Rizzo Avenue. And at the end of it, they have their own wine vineyard, which they have for just their family. And I was 14 or 15 at the time. My brother was 2 years older than me. We had Michaela, which are cousins. Yeah. So I was 15. I was 14. She was 15. Mike was 16. We sat in front of all these, like, we drank like between the three of us, 2.5 gallons of wine. I puked like 14 times. It was amazing.
Yeah.
After that, I was like, I like wine.
Formative experience.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
It's like
awesome.
one of those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a little bit of our history of who we are. But let's get into like where you are now. So I Googled your title, and of course it was wrong. Of course. Yeah.
It's fine.
So what is your associate professor of criminology? Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. And how long have you been at U of T Mississauga office?
Yes. Yeah. So I've been there probably for, hold on, let me think now. About maybe 10 years, a little over 10 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what did you do before that?
So, I mean, I did my undergrad. I did a master's degree in criminology at U of T. So I grew up in Windsor, did my undergrad at University of Windsor, moved to Toronto to do my master's degree at Center of Criminology, got a job at a criminal justice sector NGO. They basically wanted to start a research center for their kind of provincial level office. And so I and others had worked towards that. Established a research center and then started to secure funding to do research. And then a year into that, I decided to go back part-time just to pick up courses. So all methodology like stats and field methods and survey methods and stuff like that. And that was in the sociology department because they offered all these methodology courses.
Yeah.
So at that point, I liked that department. I liked what I was learning, decided to apply for my PhD, which is something I always wanted to do. And I didn't have a sort of a timeline of when I was going to do it, but I wanted to do it. So I applied for the PhD at that point, got into the PhD, and then that's what I was doing pretty much the entire time before I got the job at U of T. So I had to work for the NGO. I mean, at the time for a few of those years, I was still in the military because I'd done that for several years when I was in the Navy. And I was working some contract works, teaching part-time at like Brock University, a bit at U of T, doing contract work for the Department of Justice. So just kind of juggling, hustling, working through my PhD. And then before I finished my PhD, I applied for the job at U of T, got it, and here I am.
And now, most recently, you've actually wrote a textbook.
I did, yeah. So one of the courses I teach is we have these very large introductory courses, like 1,000 students.
And it's criminology, obviously, right?
Well, so it is in the sociology department. So
Okay.
we have a criminology program in our sociology department. Some universities do it differently, but we have a department of sociology at UTM, and we have a criminology program in that department. And our criminology program in our sociology department it's larger than most other universities' criminology programs entirely. So it's quite large. And we have an intro. At the time, we only had an intro sociology course. Only recently do we have an intro criminology course as well, but this one was the intro sociology course. And so my colleague and I, we co-teach the course. We decided to write a book because all the other books, we just didn't like them. And,
Yeah.
And so we decided to put together this textbook and spent many, many years doing that. And it was a challenging ordeal, but we got it done.
How long did it actually take?
I want to say it took a little over, I think maybe 2 years, a little over 2 years to do from scratch. And in part because they wanted, originally it was supposed to be a digital book, and then they envisioned it as both digital and print. But now most books, they're print books that they convert to digital. For us, we were developing it side by side. So we were responsible for writing the book from scratch, and then also developing all of the digital assets that go along with it. So all the videos, converting every figure in the book to a video so that it could just be quickly narrated. And instead of reading 12 pages of text with figures, you could just watch a 3-minute video where all of it gets explained and shown to you. So we went through the process of developing all of that, creating animations, all of it simultaneously. So it was quite challenging and took a long time. But
Yeah, because I remember we started the journey looking at your middle, and then a year later, you still hadn't finished.
Years,
it.
Years on, I was still like, you kept asking me, I was like, I don't want to hear about it anymore.
Yeah, and now you were telling me now you're getting another version of it too, like you're selling it, or how's it? So what? Like I forgot you were mentioning you're selling it to another publishing company.
No, so we wanted to do a second edition, and so we were able to secure the rights for the book back from the previous company. We approached another company to help us develop the second edition. So we're at the process now of revising it. We're upgrading everything.
Because you just love torture.
I do, yeah. It's like I shoot myself in the foot constantly with the amount of work I take on. So this is no surprise here. But yeah, so we're going to get that done hopefully by the end of this year, maybe early next year. We'll have that squared away, and And within a year, hopefully that book comes out.
So I don't think you guys realize how much time Nathan spent doing this. We would do showings, a whole bunch of things, and then like, yeah, I got to go home. And it's like, great, he goes, I have a cutoff. I have to do a couple of chapters, and you would work all of the night, wake up, work, like sleep for 2 hours, work out, and then start the whole process again. And I'm like, you're insane. I thought I worked a lot. You trumped me. Like you were like, this was insane. Yeah, but
It's like a 2 full-time jobs that have to get done.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So a little bit of now we got touched in criminology. Sorry, university. This is what we want to talk about too. So lots of things have changed in the last number of years, say, especially since COVID, that we would talk about, and the student body and their mentality and how things are run. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen with students in general, and how you cope with them?
So I think with, one of the, COVID is a good example of like one kind of fundamental change where I found it was more difficult for students to transition back. And I saw that especially because they had a first year course. So I was getting all the new students coming in. But there were some students whose entire experience of university was entirely online during COVID. So I see them in their third year and they've never attended a live lecture. They've never written a test in a classroom before. So you get all these different levels of anxiety and these different sort of engagement issues that students are dealing with just because of the kind of COVID cohorts. That was probably one thing that I noticed as a major difference. I would say another major difference has been the kind of like changing political climate on university campuses. That's been another thing. And my approach to dealing with that, and I mean, we can talk in more detail about either one of these, but my approach to dealing with that was always more just like educate yourself. So there's a whole bunch of perspectives out there in the world, and the more you can learn, the better you're able to communicate to your students, because not all of your students are going to come in and share your worldview. Not all of them are going to agree with you. And I invite my students, which is one of the reasons why I like the first year course the most, is because they're most likely to have people in the room who don't agree with me or who don't agree with what I'm saying. They're going to challenge you. Yeah. And I want them to challenge me. I want them to raise questions. I want them to say, I heard about this, but you're saying this, and I want that debate to happen. And in the first year classes, where you're most likely going to find the people who don't agree with you. And that's in part because a lot of the students there aren't in our program. They're in multiple programs across the university. And so they have different worldviews, different perspectives. But if you don't understand what those positions are, it's very difficult to argue against the points.
Do you have any examples so you give the audience?
Right. So one example would be, there was a class where we were introducing research about discrimination, so racial discrimination. And I had 4 young men come up to me after class and they say, we don't agree with this, like one of the concepts of white privilege. We don't agree with that. And I said, okay, well, what's the basis for the disagreement? And I would say I share their disagreement for the most part. I think it's a clumsy term that gets used wildly, inappropriately, and inaccurately. And doesn't have a strong kind of foundation.
Agreed. Beyond
many other concepts. There's more sophisticated ways to talk about things. And so they said, we don't. I said, okay, well, tell me what you don't agree with. Or like, what's the kind of the basis of the argument? And so what they were drawing from was, then these are young men who are listening to, Jordan Peterson. They're listening to Ben Shapiro. They're listening to Michael Knowles. And there are people out there in the world who make very sophisticated, very empirical arguments. If you're, as an academic, if you're not equipped, if you don't understand the basis of those arguments, and your reaction is to get, say, defensive about it, then those students are going to so easily be able to dismiss you if you don't have a good answer. But if you know where the arguments come from, then you can engage with them. And because part of my homework, quote unquote, for preparing for some of my courses is I go out there and I look around at what the other perspectives are. So that might mean sitting down for hours, just consuming media, seeing the debates, seeing arguments. And I think it served me well because even in them, I could speak their language. I could say, oh, okay, so well, this is actually the argument that you were hearing. And then I would say, like, these are the points of the argument where I think there's some agreement and they make sense. These are the points where sometimes people slip things into arguments that sound very plausible and empirical, but they're not.
Right.
I said, do you know when that happens? And they sort of went wide-eyed a little bit. And I said, it's your job, now that you're at U of T or at any university, to educate yourself, to be able to watch any speaker, whether it's somebody that you agree with that's, say, more right-leaning or somebody that you agree with that's more left-leaning, and be able to pinpoint what they're saying to know, okay, that makes sense. and then be able to figure out what they're saying in the argument that actually is not empirically grounded. And I said, there's evidence I've presented today that nobody you've mentioned could refute. And so in that sense,
what was that evidence?
Well, just the results of different studies. So if I do an audit study, an example of an audit study would be like if I was applying for a job and I had a resume, and on the resume I had names that were, I don't know, Irish or English origin, and then I had the exact same resume, but I had names that were African origin or Indian or something like that. And I distributed the resumes to the same companies, and I would wait to see who called me back for a job interview. And that's an audit study. And so what you do is you see whether or not there's any discrimination whatsoever based on the only variable that's different in that case, which is the name of the candidate. And so if people are more likely to respond to, the white candidate and less likely to respond to all the other candidates, even though the information is identical, the education and so on, then you can say, okay, the people there are making some kind of a discriminatory choice. Now, you don't know why, you just know that they are. And so then you could do further investigation to try to figure it out. So if you do audit studies that show that there's these differences in behavior or treatment, the fact that there are differences in behavior and treatment is irrefutable. Mm-hmm. And so, the best you could hope to do is look at the preponderance of evidence. So is only one study show this? Is it 10 studies? Is it 20 studies? Has this been demonstrated over multiple decades? Mm-hmm. If that's the case, you can have confidence in the results. If you can replicate a study, you could have confidence.
This is one of the issues I had when it came to, the history of the vaccines, regular vaccines with kids. And they said, well, there's no correlation between that and autism. But they only took one of the vaccines, only studied on one person. They said, oh, there's no correlation, even though some of them had autism. And it was like, well, people have done other studies since that time have actually caused, and they're saying, but no one's looking at that. They're only looking at the one for saying, well, there's no causation to that too.
The one Andrew Wakefield study.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that tossed out because they're saying the Wakefield, the one that actually did hold merit. I heard people saying that it doesn't always hold merit because it was only a small fraction of that they tested.
Well, there's a couple of reasons why that study was discredited. One was that there was a small sample. It was a selection bias. The people selected were selected by his lawyer. So the scientific integrity of the study wasn't that great. And there was the potential conflict of interest because Wakefield was trying to, as my understanding of the case goes, he was trying to also market his own
That's right.
Vaccine. And so if you can discredit your competitor, there's no better way to market your own product than to say your competitor's product is no good, right, or is causing medical problems. But beyond that, I know that one particular study, I know why that one in particular was discredited. What I sometimes see about this stuff is more correlative, right? So people will show, for example, a rise in vaccines that correlates with a rise in autism.
Yeah.
Now, correlation doesn't imply it. Correlation
doesn't cause causation.
It's not causation, so it's like you run into this problem all the time. Like in my own field of criminology, it's like, if you see crime rates going up, why are crime rates going up? If the economy goes down and crime rates go up, is it because the economy's tanking? If we hire a bunch of police officers, crime rates are going to go up. Do police cause crime? No, it's just that they're detecting more crime. So what is the cause of the increase? And that's a little trickier to parse out. Yeah.
Well, also the same thing we talked about, like that's the issue with some of these cholesterol lowering medications and stuff too. And it's like, well, if you have cholesterol when they do the autopsies, and it's like, well, but that's like saying every time a fireman shows up, they cause the fire because it's like, well, when they show up, they cause heart disease. There's no there's actually less correlation. So we talked about that. But back to the university.
Yes.
So there's a couple of things I want to talk about. And we have actually already 23 minutes in, believe it or not. We were talking about different pronouns and genders and things like that. And obviously the landscape, my brother works at Laurier and they're very leftist. And what are your stances on that? And how does it conflict with what, based on our conversations, like, what are your thoughts on the people saying that too? And like, how was U of TM pushing you to use genders or things like that? How does it affect your everyday life?
So I would say, I said there's two things about that. One would be the kind of everyday stuff. And the second thing would be like the kind of, macro level ideas, principles, and so on. In my everyday life, I had almost no effect. I mean, I've probably taught close to 25,000 students. I've only ever had one ask me to use their pronouns. 1 out of 25,000. And that student,
See, it's funny because you think about it, like the media makes it seem as like everybody
Yeah,
wants to have
yeah,
their
yeah.
pronouns. You have to
Yeah.
put he, her, and she, him, or whatever.
some
you want.
universities compel that.
Yeah.
In professor bios. So I don't use them in my bio, and I wouldn't use them in a casual conversation either. Some people feel comfortable, some people don't. I just don't. It's not a thing for me, so I don't use them. In terms of the students I'm interacting with, like and the student asked respectfully. My position has always been, when it comes to interpersonal stuff, just treat people with respect. I don't care. I don't care about anything. If it's gender identity, race, religion, it doesn't matter to me. People have their own perspectives, their own worldviews, their own experiences, and treat people with respect. You get treated with respect, you're okay. I think where there's a major issue is the way in which it sometimes gets implemented, which I find sometimes can be a little clumsy. I mean, the whole row at U of T especially, this was Jordan Peterson stuff years ago, where he effectively got booted out as a result of it. And his position was less about, I'm going to use your pronoun or not. His position was more like, government shouldn't be able to compel speech. Like, tell me that I have to call you something. And that's where it gets murky, because on the one hand, it's like, well, there's a human rights argument about that, right? Like, if people identify as something and you want to treat them respectfully. But the other part is then compelling somebody to acknowledge it or believe it. And that's the part where I think there's a lot of disagreement on.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's not many people. I mean, well, it's an empirical fact that people don't like to speak up about it because they feel like their jobs will be in jeopardy if they do.
Yeah.
So I think that's the bigger issue. That's a little clumsy, because I mean, people have many things that are intrinsic to their identity, their race, their ethnicity. I don't think somebody's religious position is any less important to their identity than other aspects of their life, but nothing compels me to go along with it. So if someone were to approach me and say, I'm a Christian and I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, I don't have to believe them. In fact, I could challenge them. If I was in a classroom and somebody made an argument from a position of a religion, I would be under no obligation to acknowledge it, to go along with it. I wouldn't have to believe it. I could challenge it on the spot and would face no repercussions. And to that individual student, their religious identity might be absolutely fundamental to who they are. Yet I wouldn't face any repercussions for saying, well, no, you're wrong, or I don't believe you, or I don't have to subscribe to your point of view or your worldview. I don't find that level of combativeness to be a good idea. Most of the time, you try to understand people's worldviews and then have a constructive dialogue, which I find better. So part of it is the kind of clumsy implementation. It's like inclusivity or else. You have to abide by these things in this particular case, but not in any other case, which is an odd sort of way to be. Like, you have to have a consistent logical argument.
So what happens in a situation if you don't acknowledge somebody's pronouns? Then, according to
I have no idea. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't imagine it would go well.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, there is a difference between the types of pressures a university might put on somebody. And I think this happened wasn't it at Laurier, where that one graduate student had recorded their sort of conversation she had with the deans and so on, because she got in trouble for showing I think a Jordan Peterson clip, or so it was all over the media, and I think she ended up suing them or something like that. But they like the universities can do some things, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. If there are rules for like the enforcement of compelled speech, you can get in trouble for it. Again, I've not heard of it at U of T. I think if it's happened, other than the Jordan Peterson row, I've not really heard of it happening in my department with my colleagues or anything like that. It hasn't really been an issue for me. And I think in part of it is just like, you can have a certain idea, but at the end of the day, if I'm sitting face to face with somebody, I think just being respectful is the best way to go all the time, no matter what their position is, whether 100%. I agree with it or not.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we had some really in-depth conversations about that kind of stuff and what things could happen. Just wanted to touch back on, like, you were explaining, like we were talking before about that one individual had additional time to do. Like, so one of the things as a challenge as a professor is, like, now some people have, quote unquote, they've used the system to their power, right? To have additional time because of learning disabilities. Or some people, not to the power, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm saying it the wrong way. So some people need additional time and that other thing too, but then there's some people just won't, doesn't matter what you give them the time, they'll.
I've had a couple encounters like that where to be able to get into what we call accessibility services at the university, if you like, it takes a lot. You have to have a lot of documentation. You have to, like, it's not an easy thing to do. So that the idea that somebody could sort of like malinger and fake their way into it would be almost impossible. It requires so much documentation. So
Damn it.
I know. So you know, and the students that get in there, I would say by and large, it's fine. Like you almost never have to interact with them because the accessibility sets it up in a way where they've done the vetting, they've done the, so I'll get a letter that just basically outlines the accommodation for the student. I implement the accommodation and that's it. It doesn't require anything else.
So explain to some people what some of these accommodations are, right?
Sure. So it could be something like having additional time to write a test. It could be getting sort of structured breaks throughout the time period to write the test. It could be there are vision impaired students. So for example, you produce instead of an online test, you might produce a Word document that they can then put into a system that allows them to answer the questions.
That's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, they've got great technology now for some of that stuff. And some could be, you know, like if they get migraines, it could be having dimmed lights. Like there could be all kinds of these different accommodations. They're all very, very different. And we don't ever know what the root cause is. So I don't know. I never know what the issue is because we never see any of the personal private information of the student. And by and large, it's completely fine. It's never really an issue. Where it can become a problem is when students are, and I've had this happen a couple of times where they go beyond the scope of what the accommodation is, where I've had students before who have, you know, effectively demanded that you be on call at all times of the day when they write their test. And have had the chair of my department very politely shut that down on my behalf. I've had students who tried to push for, even though I, you know, if there was a mistake or something in the accommodation where you kind of bend over backwards to try to provide additional supports and you consult with the student and so on, where they go beyond that to sort of demand more things. And it's like, you know, there's a limit to what these things can do.
Right.
And I think you just have to understand what the limits are. Or if there's a certain course where the entire structure of the course is case analysis and group work, and there's no way around that. And so students that come in, you always accommodate them. But I've had a couple of students in the past who, you know, they go, well, I want to do the individual assignment and I want to do it, you know, outside of a group. And I'm like, that's not what this course is about. The entire pedagogical structure is based on this method. And like, there's other 400 level courses you can take. Maybe this one's not for you. And so there is where we're not really expected to sort of completely throw the course out the window to do that. But I would say 99% of the time it's no problem. Mm-hmm. But every once in a while, there's that push. And I think, you know, in my department, at least, the leadership there have been very clear about making sure that you respect those accommodations, but also they know when to put their foot down. Yeah. And I think other faculty members do as well. And like I said, most of the students are great. Most of the time you never meet them because they don't have to interact with you. They're not required to announce themselves to you. You just get a letter and you make the accommodation and the problem is solved.
Huh, that's interesting. There was that one individual who was saying to you, he's trying to use the system.
Oh yeah. And that, I mean, it was like really leveraging and like the kind of language. I think what I resented the most about that instance was the type of language the student used in the email.
Talk about that one in instance.
I'm not going to go into too much detail. It was very much like I found it very let's say manipulative in a way. Yeah. This was somebody who was really trying to squeeze as much as they could outside of what they were allowed to, and to really take advantage of, you know, because like there were mistakes made. I really bent over backwards to fix them. The student agreed to everything we talked about, but then asked for more beyond that. And I just said no. And then like I can say no. They're super. Their individual can come and talk to me if they want, and it could be an open discussion. But I put my foot down and said, like, I've done everything I can, and you've agreed to all of it, and you can't start asking me for more. And it would be no problem if they were respectful about it, but I don't think the student was very respectful about it. And that was what really got me, because most of the time when students are interacting with you, it's, you know, it's all very fine and respectful, and you know, and if you give a rationale for anything, they'll accept that. If they give a rationale, I'll accept it too. Mm-hmm. It's a two-way street as far as I'm concerned. But you know, one or two cases you get. And again, for 10 years of teaching, one or two cases is not bad. No. When you get, there's dozens every year. So, yeah.
Wow. Believe it or not, we've ran through it all the time. I told you, like, we didn't get into talking about the kids in their martial arts and how the school, like, I had a whole bunch of questions to ask, but literally we got to the point where it's like, and I knew it was going to fly by with you.
Oh yeah, no, I know. This is great.
We're going to probably have to do like a second interview later on.
If I still have a job, I'll come.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, you're all good. Yeah. So if there's one piece of advice you give people, like, like how's the university change and stuff too, if somebody wants to become like, so would you say that there's a difference in somebody looking to get into university or maybe somebody want to be a professor? Like, how has the landscape changed, and any kind of piece of advice?
Getting into university, I mean, that I don't know, because that's a process I don't yet know about. I'm going to find out very soon because my daughter is eventually going to get it. But for that one, I'm not entirely sure, because it's an area of the university I don't deal with at all. Admissions. I don't, right. I mean, what I deal with is students coming into their first year. The advice I generally give to anyone coming into the first year, so I do a lot of the Head Start and orientation stuff too, where you're in front of these students right before school starts, and similar questions will come up, like, how do I be successful? What do I do? And my advice is always, the one piece of advice I give, which nobody likes, is, grit your teeth, put your head down, and learn to have some ironclad discipline, because you're going to need it. Learn to manage your time. Learn to make the sacrifices. And you can juggle, you can get ahead, you can do a lot of things, but that's how you're going to do it. There's no easy way. There's no magic bullet, like, unless you're some kind of savant.
Believe it or not, that works for real estate too. I've been telling the same thing over and over again. There's no, I've known literally realtors that quit, like coaches. I'm like, wow, like, well, he's not saying anything new. I'm like, well, just do what he tells you to do. Put the work in. Like, it's like, I literally had the conversation with this when I was in my, like was brand new.
Yeah.
He's like, well, did you do any of the work? She's like, no, I just expected something different. I was like, do the fucking work.
Yeah. Well, you have to put the work in. And students ask me all the time, like, well, how do we do well on the tests? And I'm like,
study.
I'm like you, if you, like, I can tell you what I used to do, but I'm not you and you're not me, and it might not work for you. And the students end up asking me, well, how'd you do well this year? Or what'd you do in your third year and your fourth year? I'm like, well, don't ask me. You're asking the introvert who's got a halfway decent memory. I didn't have a social life. I did martial arts. I did fitness. I did work. I had like 3 or 4 jobs. I was in the military, and I did school. That's what I did. And that's it. I didn't do anything else. So if you structure your life in a very disciplined way, you can get a lot done. So have some discipline, and then do a bunch of other stuff. Take advantage, like the university, like nowadays, is so much more eventful than when I was an undergrad student. We had nothing, but now they've got like research courses and internship courses and independent stuff. You got all kinds of things you can do. Like, take advantage of these things and build up your resume, because even if you don't know what you want to do, position yourself to do everything you want to do well. Do you know if you want a job? Okay, well, if you don't know, build your resume up so when you say, okay, I want to go in the labor market, you've got something to show for your time at university. Do you know you want to go to grad school or law school? Great. Then get your GPA up so that you're competitive with the pool of people who are going to have insanely high GPAs. So position yourself to do whatever you want, so that when it comes time to make the choices you want to make, you have the opportunities to do that. And that's easier said than done. There are some students who are not in a good spot, and they have to like work 30 hours a week and and to be able to pay their own tuition. So it's a little tougher for them. But like, at that point, make relationships. I'm giving this advice, which I never followed, which is go talk to your prof, go to office hours. Like, I've had so many students that I've been able to support, to provide like SNAP internships too, because I could get something for them and line it up for them, or research courses for them so they could do what they want, because they came and talked to me, and I was able to find something to do and set them up, to kind of help meet them halfway. Like, I got a couple students now that are designing an entire mentorship program for struggling first year students. And I'm like, let's just do it. We're going to get it. We're going to implement it. We're going to make it work. It's going to be an absolutely insane amount of work for you and an absolutely insane amount of work for me. But you have 1 year left at university. Let's make it happen. You've got something you can walk out the door with. And maybe that program will continue when you're gone.
So to wrap this up, it's the same thing I talked about Motivational Monday. I don't know if you guys watched it or not. It's like, everything that happens in your life, it's your fault, in a good way.
Yeah.
If you're successful, it's your fault. If you're not successful, it's also your fault. So we'll wrap up with that. Thanks, Nathan, for coming.
My pleasure.
It's been an awesome talk.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have Instagram or you want people to reach out to you, but if you do, you can do a shout out. If not, you're like, nah, I'll just be my own person.
My usual introvert bubble. So nothing, no shout outs.
All right, cool. Well, for us, we always like it. We like when you like and share and comment on our videos. If you subscribe at YouTube, we love that as well. Share this with your family and friends and find this useful. If you have a child who wants to get into university, I think that piece of advice in general that Nathan just gave is literally, it's immeasurable, because I agree full-heartedly with that. Even if you're an entrepreneur, exactly what he said, it's the same thing. The talks we had today, it translates across many genres. So continue to do that. Thanks again for joining us today at the DC Talks. This has been episode 90. Yeah, 90. So thanks again for everybody following along, and we'll see you next week with Owen and I have a nice chat about the sun. Bye for now.